1 in 5 couples will experience infertility, and back in 2011, the average cost of a treatment like IVF was up to $50,000 out of pocket. But today, IVF is more affordable than ever before. Still ain't cheap though. So according to the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, the average cost is $12,400. But there are ways to make it more cost effective, so I'm going to share 5 different ways to pay for IVF, because everyone deserves access to family building opportunities without breaking their bank. Starting from the least well-known option to the most, strategy number 1 is shared risk clinics and refund programs. IVF often requires multiple cycles, and there's really no guarantee that it's going to work. So to offset those expenses and the fact that you may have to pay for alternative paths to parenthood later, shared risk clinics will refund some or all of your costs if your treatments are not successful. According to Very Well Family, some IVF refund packages will ask for a flat fee up front for 3 to 6 cycles, which means if you succeed, great, but you won't get a refund for the remaining cycles. But if the IVF isn't successful, at least you'll receive your money back. And of course, you should always cost compare between different clinics. You may need to pass certain eligibility requirements, like being under a certain age, which has a higher success rate, or living within a certain region. So read the fine print to help narrow down your search. Our next strategy to make IVF more affordable is to check out grants and lotteries, aka money that you don't have to give upfront or pay back. How does the grant work? Several regional and national nonprofits and foundations offer awards or the gift of parenthood to those experiencing infertility. Grants may only cover IVF, but some might also include other fertility treatments like IUI, surrogacy, and egg freezing. Now, the average grant amount is $5,000, but some awards can go as high as $10,000. And of course, you may still be on the hook for any out-of-pocket expenses above those numbers, but this can cover a large chunk of your costs. Resolve, which is an online resource brought to you by the National Infertility Association, has a roundup of organizations across the US offering grants, so check them out to see about nominal application fees and eligibility criteria and timing, and we'll link that in the description for you. You could also look into an IVF lottery or contest, and I should note that some do require you to apply by sharing your infertility story, and I think the ethics on that can get a little bit murky, which we will share with you in the description below. But again, it could be a way to access family building services without shelling out tens of thousands of dollars. Okay, so this third strategy, bit of a workaround, but hear me out. If you're watching this earlier on in your life, before you are going down this path, consider egg freezing, or a procedure where you will harvest, freeze, and store your ovarian eggs for later use. You could use a viable egg from that process one day for intrauterine insemination or IUI, which is much cheaper than IVF. Now, you'll have to budget for egg freezing up front, which is not cheap. According to the New York Times, a single cycle of egg freezing can cost between $4,500 to $8,000, in addition to the injectable medications that you'll need and the annual egg storage costs, which can be over $500 a year. And if this is something you're considering, check your healthcare coverage to see if this is a benefit. But then if you try IUI later on, that cost could be up to 40 times cheaper than IVF. Now, IVF is usually more successful than IUI, but if you have a long timeline ahead of you before trying to conceive, this could be a more affordable option in the long run, despite being more expensive up front. You can think of it as paying for fertility treatments over a longer span of time, even if the costs end up being the same. Which brings us to strategy number 4, and hopefully the most accessible one, which is fertility healthcare coverage. In the US, as of 2021, 68.4% of Americans were covered by a private health insurance plan, whether through their employer or the private marketplace. In your best case scenario, your existing benefits will cover some or all of IVF. So I think this is the optimal place to begin your search. As of May 2023, 21 states have passed fertility insurance coverage laws, and 14 of them include IVF coverage. For example, because my employer is based in New York, I checked our plan and saw that 3 rounds of IVF were covered. If you're part of this lucky group that has this coverage, you can ask your healthcare provider a few additional questions, like if the cap is on a number of cycles or a certain dollar amount, which medications are covered, and if there's a waiting period to qualify. We interviewed an expert on fertility benefits on this week's full episode of the Money with Katie Show podcast that we will link in the description, and she shares additional questions and some considerations to keep in mind. But remember your rights as a patient, get everything in writing. Okay, but let's say you don't currently have insurance coverage that offers this kind of benefit. What could you do to change that? You have 3 solid alternatives. Number 1 is to pitch fertility benefits coverage to your current HR and benefits team. This type of feedback really helps them bolster their case when they are strategizing new plans, and our guest on the podcast echoes this as well. The second is to switch to an employer who does offer this coverage, which may sound kind of extreme, but might actually be the most cost-effective way to start your family in the long run. And the third, depending on your priorities, of course, is that you could consider moving to a state where this benefit is mandated. And again, here's that list of states for you. And finally, we have our most well-known strategy, which is taking on loans and debt. So while you can research personal loans for a number of reasons, including fertility treatments, there are some IVF-specific loans that are worth checking out. And according to Investopedia, these lenders will offer lengthy repayment terms up to 84 months, which is 7 years, and low APRs starting right now, unfortunately, around 7.5%. Lenders in this list include PenFed Credit Union, Best Egg, BHG, and Rocket Loans. So we will share that link in the description as well. And as for debt, especially within the personal finance world, I think it's important to acknowledge that debt might be the reality for a decision this large and expensive. But my personal view is that if you know you want to become a parent and there's a viable solution for doing so that may require you to engage in some creative financing, it's hard to put a price on having a baby. And this can unfortunately introduce some perverse incentives. Companies can charge whatever they want because they know it's likely the biggest decision you'll ever make and you are going to spend accordingly. But I don't think there should be shame associated with needing to take out loans or carrying debt to amortize the cost of something this large over time. If you are putting some of the expenses on a credit card up front with the intention to pay it off over the next several months or a year, you can consider a 0% APR credit card to minimize interest payments, but be very, very careful with this approach because if you do not pay it all off before the 0% introductory period ends, your payments will balloon and they will snowball very quickly. At the end of the day, taking on loans or debt won't necessarily make the cost of IVF cheaper, but it will amortize the costs over time, and sometimes that can be enough. That's all for this week over here on YouTube, but if you want to hear the full deep dive on the costs of infertility, including IUI, IVF, and adoption, we're going to break down the expenses associated with each in the show this week, so just click the link in the description of this video. And before we go, comment below what you thought the most interesting part of our conversation was, and remember to like and subscribe to our channel. And I'll see you next week, same time, same place on The Money with Katie Show.